Hi, today we'll be speaking to Luke Billingham on youth violence. How are you, Luke?
All good, all good. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. So, to start us off, can you describe your journey from a 16-year-old to where you are today?
Yes, I'll try not to take 12 hours to do so. Um, but I think to describe from 16 on, I have to go back a little bit. So I was born and grew up in Hackney, which is in northeast London. And it is a brilliant place. It's the place that I love most in the world, but it's also a place that has significant problems and issues. So I'm a relatively privileged person, I would say. Growing up in Hackney, I grew up in a little house. A lot of my friends were living in overcrowded accommodation and so on. There's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of immigration issues, there's all kinds of difficulties people face in Hackney. So that was where I also went to school up to the age of 11. And then I went to secondary school in basically a posher bit of London. It was a grammar school. I had to do an exam to get in. It wasn't fee paying, it was free. It's funded by the state, but I had to do an exam to get in. And so by the age of 16, I'd been in this secondary school 5 years. And essentially, I'd gone from being relatively privileged in a very kind of working class area where there was a lot of as I mentioned, lots of different kinds of issues, to then going to a school where I was one of the least posh people. I was one of the least like middle class people. And so I'd always been reflecting on that. And then the big thing that happened around the age of 16 was that I did an A level, which is like the last exams you do, the last courses you do in school, did an A level on sociology.
Yep.
And studying sociology was a big thing because I'd always been thinking about social issues because of growing up in Hackney, because of then seeing the kind of the quite fundamental differences between the young people I was growing up with in Hackney and then the young people I was encountering at school. And then that was a big shift. And then I went to uni, I went to Cambridge University, studied sociology and politics and psychology, trained to be a teacher, decided not to go straight into teaching, ended up not going into teaching at all, and instead quite quickly got into youth work, like mentoring, supporting young people. Quite quickly started working in a youth centre in Hackney, just down the road from where I grew up. I used to work in the youth centre and then also in a school, and now I work in the youth centre and then also do academic research. And all of it, obviously the youth work, but also the research, is guided by a desire to think deeply about the lives of young people and hopefully do what I can to support and improve the lives of young people, especially in Hackney where I grew up.
Cool, that's amazing. So I'm going to change the topic more towards youth violence itself. How common is violence among the youth today in comparison to the previous decades in society?
To give a slightly boring academic answer. So it depends what country you're talking about. I'm guessing you're talking about Britain. It also depends what measure you use, because like police recorded violence differs from hospital admissions data, differs from when you do surveys of people. And it depends on what you mean by youth. It depends how old you mean, etc., etc., etc. I won't get too boring with all my like caveats. But if you look at violence as a whole, violence occurring now isn't as high as it was in like the 1990s in Britain. There's a lot of headlines, there's a lot of media sensationalism about kind of, young people are more violent than they've ever been before. Like this next generation are a terrifying mass of violent young people. And it's just not true. If you look at the data, there have been times in the recent past where things have been worse in terms of violence. There's certain forms of violence, like knife-enabled violence, which seem to be significantly bad at the moment. But again, I think I'm right in saying around the year 2008, 2009, things were as bad, if not worse. And so we have to avoid exaggerating. We have to avoid sensationalizing the issue. What I'm most interested in is international comparison. Britain is a more violent society, including violence between young people, than many other countries in Western Europe, and has been for a very long time. So you can look at how it goes up and down within Britain over the decades. But what for me is more important is that across that entire period, across the last 50 years, 100 years, like since data began, Britain has tended to be more violent than comparable societies in Western Europe. And that's the thing that most concerns me. How do we permanently become a significantly less violent society? That's what concerns me more than thinking about kind of year on year comparisons. Yep. because that's you're right for, like, it all depends on when you start. Like if you take 1 year as your starting point and then compare to now, it'll look very different. So if you take another year as your starting point and so on. So I think
Yeah.
international comparison is most important for thinking about permanent reductions in violence.
So I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa, which also deals with a lot of violence and among the youth and overall among people. What is your solution to trying to fix this youth violence issue?
My solution isn't a simple one, because I think you can only understand an issue like violence if you think about various different kinds of factors that feed into it. So one hugely significant factor is economic inequality. So there was a brilliant study done by a guy called Elliot Curry, and he looked at an international comparison, which countries had more violence. And one of the key factors is inequality. If you have immense wealth and then you have pockets of deep poverty, that is what Elliot Curry described as conducive conditions for violence. And all the anthropological research, the kind of research where people have spent time among young people who may have engaged in violence, it always shows that inequality of resources, but also inequality of recognition, breeds violence. And by recognition, I mean status, respect, appreciation, value. If you have a society in which people feel like they're both economically really struggling while others are really wealthy, but also feeling like they're stigmatized, like they're undervalued, like they're underappreciated, like they're belittled relative to other people, that's what breeds violence. And so we have to think about those economic factors. We have to think about cultural factors. It's men that are violent. Broadly speaking, violence is a male problem. So there's certain cultures of masculinity, certain norms among men that are problematic and can generate violence. We need to think about that. And then obviously we need to think about more individual factors. We need to think about young people's childhood experiences from the early years and how that affects their psychology. We have to think about different psychological struggles that individuals can have at different points, caused by different things that occur to them, by friends being victim of violence, by them being a victim of violence, by getting kicked out of school, whatever it may be. So we have to think about economic factors, cultural factors, individual factors, and we have to think broadly about what is it about a society that makes it violent and how can we address that, rather than thinking that we can just design some wonderful 6-week program and then run around Cape Town or run around London and just to deliver this program everywhere, and then that'll solve everything. It's not that easy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because countries that have high violence because of the history of the societies.
So you mentioned that there's some norms among men that are almost causing this thing. What are those norms, and how can men almost try get these norms out of our society to try hopefully fix this problem?
So I'd emphasize again, like, this is one factor among many others. I don't want to suggest it's the only one, but there's a lot about control and a lot about power and a lot about ownership. So men feeling like the definition of what it means to be a man, or the way to get respect as a man, is to control a lot of things, own a lot of things, or have power over a lot of things, and not just things, but people. So a lot of the worst tendencies in society are exacerbated by men, especially feeling like, I need to control a lot of people, I need to have power over people, I need to own things and people. So the most exploitative business practices are often driven by men who have this deep-seated desire to own, to control, to exploit. And then the worst examples of violence, and not just violence between young people, but also domestic violence in the household, are in part driven by a man's desire to control or own a woman or a child or whatever it is. So a kind of a dysfunctional desperation to feel that they have power over others. That's a big part of the problem.
Yeah. So I go to a boys' school in Cape Town here, and I think a lot of it's almost, rah rah, I'm a man, do this. I think that's part of the problem. Is there any advice you would give to the youth who are growing up in this sort of society where it's almost encouraging this masculinity, or should I say toxic masculinity environment?
I think it's individually and collectively seeking other ways to define yourself, and other ways to gain respect and self-respect, because all of us, however much we like to think of ourselves as these wonderfully unique individuals who define our own identity, we all need appreciation. We all need to be valued by others. And so part of this is about seeking out the right kinds of peers and friends who will value you for who you are, rather than for how good you are at fighting or some nonsense.
Yeah.
And none of us can avoid being vulnerable to the opinions, the thoughts of others, but all of us can make choices about whose respect we seek to gain. I think that's a massively important thing for all young people. It's easy to run around thinking, I want to impress everyone, or I want the coolest kids in school to like me, whatever. You can make choices about who makes the biggest difference to you. You can make choices about whose respect matters to you. And I think a big mistake too often is young people thinking like, you know, they want the respect of people who are not going to be positive for them. And that could be friends in school, or that could be what I would describe as kind of negative role models. Like, you know, if you want to impress someone like Andrew Tate, you're trying to impress the wrong kind of person. You're on a hide into a damaging form of existence for yourself and others.
Yeah. So we've dealt with the people who are almost causing the violence in discussing the two gender norms per se. What about the people who are being faced with violence? How can they get away from it?
Again, without being too pedantic, I think a lot of it depends on the individual circumstance. As in, like, there are points in time and places where it's where you live. Like there is violence in your environment, in households, on the street, and so the question of kind of avoiding it or escaping it is an incredibly difficult one. It's not a matter of individual choice. If you don't have a ton of money, then you're not able to just like get up one day and move out of your area. So I don't want to overstate how easy it is to get out of these things. But a lot of it comes down to appropriate support from the right people at the right time, if that's available to you. So it might be a family member, it might be a friend, it might be someone at your school, it might be a youth worker, it might be someone at a religious institution like your mosque or your church or whatever it might be. But and it's almost similar to my previous point, but in relation to adults, like seeking the right trusting relationships with the right kinds of mentors, the right kinds of role models who can help guide you and help give you appreciation, help give you a sense that you're worth something, but for positive things, for things that will help your future. I could say a lot more, but I think that's one thing that can help.
So I'm going to create a hypothetical situation. Let's say someone came and asked you for advice and said, I'm being bullied, I'm being beaten a lot at school and dealing with youth violence. What advice would you give them?
Firstly, I would depending on their age and so on, I would talk to them about their school, talk to them about sources of support within their school. Because if that's occurring in their school, that shouldn't be tolerated by the school. The school should be doing something about it. So essentially, my first line of support questioning would be, have you told anyone at school what's going on with the school? If you haven't told anyone, I completely understand why you might not want to. Do you want me to go? Shall I go with you? Shall I talk to someone with the school with you? Have your parents raised it with the school? So that's one line of, like, institutionally, what is the school doing about it? Because in terms of a community, in terms of the social norms within a community, schools should not be tolerating that occurring and should have good systems, processes to prevent it or to address it if it is happening. And then the other side of things would be assessing for the individual young person what's going on, and both in the immediate term, the possibilities they have to avoid for individuals who are causing problems, but then also how they can build a more positive image of themselves in their future. Because one of the most damaging effects of bullying often is leaving an individual feeling like they're a piece of crap and they're worth nothing, because the way that they're being treated by that bully heavily implies that they're nothing but a victim. They're nothing but someone who should suffer. And that's incredibly difficult self-image to break down. But that's what I would want to work on with an individual in this scenario if they came to me and chat to me about it.
And if you brought it up to a school, what would you suggest, or how would you suggest the reaction of the school should be to try fix the issue?
If I rocked up to a school and described this situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you think the school should do? What's the solution within these schools to try fix the problem?
So I think schools need to think about it carefully and intelligently, depending on the scenario, because a school could very easily be incredibly punitive and just be like, right, these kids are the perpetrators of bullying or of violence. Let's get rid of them. And that happens all too often. So in this country, we've got a big problem with a load of kids getting expelled from school for various reasons. And what tends to happen too often, not always, but what tends to happen is those individuals then end up in institutions that are underfunded, that are not well set up to provide them the support that they need. And then things get worse because you essentially end up with a load of kids getting expelled, meeting other expelled kids. And then in worst case scenarios, there's a kind of school to prison pipeline where marginalization through the education system leads up to involvement in criminal justice. So I would not advocate for a punitive solution, but there are schools that have restorative justice approaches, for instance, that can work well if they're practiced well, where you do some work with the perpetrators, so to speak, those who are doing the bullying, which is supportive, which is empathetic, which is trying to get to the root of what is going on for them. And then you kind of do the same with the victim, so to speak. And then in an ideal world, you do high quality, deep, compassionate, empathetic work with both, such that you can bring them together in a manner which is kind of healing of the tensions between them. But that's a lot easier for
than to do it. Yeah. And then, are there any other key factors that contribute to youth violence?
So I think I've given kind of broad categories, haven't I? Like economic, social, cultural ones, and then individual ones. I think another one, more specifically, is the conditions that are there for parents to be good parents. So there are some countries, there are some societies in which childcare for very young children is affordable, in which poverty is prevented by decent social security, in which employers provide good, flexible working for mums and dads so that they can give adequate attention and support to their kids. In other countries, and I would include Britain in this, unfortunately, childcare is ridiculously unaffordable for a lot of families.
Yeah.
Social security is inadequate, so a lot of parents live in poverty. Employers are horribly exploitative, so you've got parents sometimes working 2 jobs, getting paid very little in order to just make ends meet. So then in their interactions with their kids, they're stressed to high heaven. There's a lot of pressure on them. And that's not a good state to be in as a parent. I've got a young kid myself. I've got all kinds of privileges and advantages that help me, but still it pushes me to the edge at times. My kid's only 1.5 years old. And so, like, what is it like to be a parent in a particular society is a hugely important factor when thinking about the outcomes and the flourishing of young people, including the potential for them to commit violence. Because in too many cases, young people who end up being violent have suffered from the negative conditions that they've experienced at home. And at times that is directly willful harm by a parent, but more often there are situations that the parent is in, which means that they're not in the best environment, they're not in the best situation they could be to parent as well as they want to parent. So that's another hugely important factor here.
Cool. So I'm going to change the topic more towards your book, Against Youth Violence. You've mentioned the concept of social harm. Can you discuss why it's important to educate people on the topic of social harm to try empower young individuals?
So a lot of what I've been talking about is ultimately social harm. There's a chunky chapter in the book going into like the philosophy and theories of social harm, which I will not summarize here, because broadly speaking, social harm is a kind of umbrella category for 2 different things: harm that is derived from other individuals, so interpersonal harm, and kind of harm that occurs which could have been prevented by other individuals, and then structural harm, so harms caused by policies, by systems, by institutions. And so if you were to slap me in the face, that would be an interpersonal harm. You would be kind of damaging me in a way that's directly caused by you. If you were the head teacher of a school and you were neglectful in the undertaking of your duties, such that I was getting bullied badly, you could describe that as a structural harm. I'm experiencing a harm which your institution could have prevented. So when thinking about the life course of an individual young person, any young person, but including young people who commit violence, I think it can be helpful to think of what forms of social harm did that young person experience? How could they have been prevented? How could they be prevented in future? Because ultimately, I think a good measure of a society is how much are the children and young people flourishing. And flourishing is like the opposite of harm, as in like the more social harm a young person experiences, the more barriers there are to that young person flourishing.
Yep.
And what every society should be doing is considering how can we support the young people growing up in our society to flourish. And as part of that, it's how do we prevent them from experiencing harm from other individuals, but also from policies, from institutions that are in our society. That's how to reduce violence over the long term.
And you've also mentioned the concept of mattering. Could you explain this concept and how mattering can contribute to the reduction of violence among the youth group?
Yeah, so I mean, with both social harm, but it's almost especially with mattering, what I don't want to do is suggest that I came up with them, or my co-author did. So there's a long history of writing about both social harm and mattering. Mattering, especially, the kind of two main people to look at more will be Gordon Flett and Isaac Perel-Tensky, who are both psychologists in the States. And essentially, what everyone articulates when talking about mattering is two sides of it. So one is feeling significant to other human people. So feeling appreciated, valued, feeling like your existence is recognized by others. You're not invisible. You're not a nothing to other people. But then also the other important part of it is feeling like you have some influence. Your existence makes some difference in the world. And we see in very young babies, and I definitely see this in my little one, that there's a fundamental human need to both be recognized, appreciated by others, but also to feel like you've got some power, you've got some influence in the world. And so the obvious example in the case of babies is babies get extremely delighted when your expression changes because of them, because that on a very kind of primordial level, the baby is recognizing, like, I've been seen, I'm kind of valued, I'm appreciated, and also I can influence my parent. Like the world around me is something that I can influence to an extent. And what's incredibly damaging is people throughout their life course having multiple experiences which make them feel like they don't matter, which are kind of diminishing, which are belittling, which make them feel stigmatized, disrespected, underappreciated, but which also make them feel utterly powerless. And that's a kind of especially pernicious, especially damaging combination of experiences if you're made to feel like you're worth nothing, but also like you can do nothing. And addressing that is key to improving children and young people's lives, but especially addressing violence, because there is a lot of research that shows, again, especially men, if men feel belittled, stigmatized, humiliated, if they feel ashamed, if they feel powerless, that can exacerbate the desperation in men to assert themselves, to have power, to have control, those things I mentioned earlier. And in worst case scenarios, that can be kind of precipitating factors for violence. And
is there any advice you would give to those who feel like they're powerless or feel like they're worth nothing?
I think there's multiple different sources of mattering, sources of feeling you're significant and feeling like you have some power in the world. I never want to overemphasize the responsibility of individuals to address their own marginalization. So one thing, which is the factors I mentioned about Hackney earlier, racism, inequality, housing issues, all of that can have a belittling influence on individuals. And what I don't want to suggest is like individuals are responsible, wholly responsible for reversing their own disadvantage, because societies as a whole need to prevent that from happening. But talking about individuals, I think one thing is seeking out the capacities, the skills, the abilities you've got, where you can change things in the world in a way that also gains you appreciation and respect. So for some individuals, that's like academic, like they're brilliant, like academic, they can channel their emotional investment, they can channel their energy into that. And it's both rewarding to develop that skill because you're kind of changing things in the world in a way that comes from you, but also you get some appreciation. But not everyone's academics. For some it's sport, for some it's art, for some it's music, whatever it might be. I think it can increase your sense of like power and appreciation if you develop a particular capacity, a particular kind of craft, which expresses your individuality, which develops a particular capacity that you've got, and which also helps you to like integrate into different social groups in a manner which is based on appreciation. If you're brilliant at music, often that involves connecting with a community of musicians. Same with sport, same with academia, same with whatever it is. And I think that's the thing that can help individuals to feel like I'm of worth, I'm valued, and also I can influence things. Maybe I can change the way that a certain music genre is thought of. Maybe I can get a load of sales, a load of people can hear my music or whatever it is. But the balance is always not over investing narrowly in one thing. So I think this is another mistake that sometimes young people make, and certainly I've made. If you over invest your image of yourself in one thing, I'm going to be the world's best footballer, I'm going to be the world's best professor, whatever it might be, then it is utterly crushing if you don't achieve that. Yeah. So using a financial metaphor, every young person needs to diversify their emotional investments. Like, you need to have a sense of multiple things being really meaningful for you: your friends, your family, music, art, sport, whatever it is, such that you feel like you're well-rounded, so that there's roots to gain appreciation, there's roots to gain respect, there's roots to gain a sense of power, of influence in multiple different places, so that if things go to, I was going to swear, if things go badly in one of them, you've got other fields, you've got other social groups, you've got other places to kind of explore what it means to be a young person.
Yep. So for the large part, we've been discussing the problems that we deal with in our communities and societies, and also the solutions for them. Are there any positive and inspiring examples of community change that you've seen in your area?
Plenty. I think one of the most inspiring is what I would broadly describe as like mutual support. So people who are experiencing common challenges coming together and working on it together. So this is what you see a lot in any kind of like parenting support groups. And I haven't been involved in like directly delivering them, but I've kind of helped to organize them. And what you often get is brilliant like staff, brilliant professionals who nurture mutual support between the people there. So it might be like a 10-week course to help parents, I don't know, discipline their children in a way that's positive and nurturing, say, for example. And often the most inspiring thing, the most interesting, the most positive thing that comes from that is that it's not about the parent like taking in the content and being like, oh yes, that PowerPoint, I remember that well, and that's really important. It's more about the conversations that occur between the parents. And there's a kind of solidarity and a kind of mutual support between people who are often struggling with the same kind of thing. And I use the specific example of a parenting course, but you see that in all kinds of different ways. People who are struggling against racism or poverty or immigration difficulties or housing difficulties or young people struggling with mental health. Often the most inspiring thing is when those who are struggling come together, support one another, and push for both individual and collective change, kind of both individual and political change. So it's both about supporting one another with current difficulties and working together to push for change, to push for more adequate housing, or to push for more mental health provision for young people, or whatever it might be.
Yep. So a constant theme throughout the podcast is defining success. And I ask all my guests this from the first episode I did up until now. What is your personal definition of success?
I think what I've just said maybe helps to lead into this, because I think my personal definition of success kind of pivots around the idea of developing your individual skills, relationships, abilities, such that you individually gain a sense of reward, contentment, kind of satisfaction, but also so that you're positively contributing to those around you and the world. That there's too much of an individualistic idea of success, which is basically get very rich as an individual person, and you might harm a shed load of people, you might exploit a load of people, you might ruin the planet as you do it, but you've got a load of money, so well done, you're successful. I think that's nonsense. I think our definition of success has to be both individual and collective. So for me personally, if I write decent books that people appreciate, if I do decent research, but if as a youth worker I do good work with young people, that'll hopefully be a mixture of me individually feeling sense of reward, sense of satisfaction, sense of contentment, but also it'll be positively supporting young people, positively supporting the community that I'm from, contributing in some way towards making things better for young people in Britain. So I think success always has to be considered on the individual and a collective basis, and neither should have too much emphasis, because what also isn't success is somebody absolutely annihilating themselves in the service of a cause in a way that undermines their own personal life. So too often social workers, teachers, police officers, if you're kind of overly basing your whole life on what can I do to kind of wring out all of my energy to support others, then that can be kind of annihilating for the self. So I think there's problems if you over individualize or over collectivize success. I think it has to be a good mixture, good balance of the two.
And then to end us off, I usually ask the question, if you could go back and say one thing to your 16-year-old self, what would it be? But I'm going to split this into two separate questions. So first of all, if you could go back and say one thing to your 16-year-old self, what would it be? And second of all, if you had to say one thing to people dealing with youth violence, what would that be?
I would I've got I've had my difficulties, I've had my struggles, but broadly speaking, I'm I'm pretty happy with how things have gone since I was 16. And I think, like every 16-year-old, I was racked with insecurities and worries and concerns about what the future might look like. And so I think my message to my 16-year-old self would probably just be, it's going to be all right. And always be grateful for the things that you've got that mean that things can be all right. The friends you've got, the support you've got, and so on. And then the second was young people who are affected by violence.
Yes.
I think if we're talking about individuals who are victims of violence, then I would say don't blame yourself, because I think a lot of people suffering from different kinds of harm face all kinds of psychological difficulties as a result of that. And a lot of people who are suffering from abuse, harm, violence, on a deep level feel like for some reason they brought it upon themselves or it's their own fault. And self-blame can be a contributing factor towards individuals suffering even more from violence or harm or abuse. So in terms of victims of violence, I think that would be the main thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you joining me today. And yeah, hopefully I can get this out to as many teenagers and youth as possible to try fix the issue. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers,
Cool.
Ben.